On Christmas night, my own son asked me for half my salary. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I said one calm sentence, and it changed our family forever. My name is Mara Ellison, and until that evening, I thought I knew exactly who I was in my family. The steady one. The one who made things work. The house was warm, smelling of pine, baked ham, and the cinnamon candles I'd lit after getting home from work. The tree glowed in the corner, ornaments arranged the way I always arranged them, quietly, carefully, as if effort only counted when no one saw it. I told myself the night would be simple, peaceful, just family. I was wrong. Halfway through dinner, my son, Evan, cleared his throat. He didn't look at me right away. His eyes flicked to his wife, Claire, who gave him a small nod, controlled, confident, practiced. "Mom," Evan said, forcing a smile, "Claire and I have been talking. We think it's time you helped us in a more meaningful way." I set my fork down slowly. Claire leaned forward, fingers interlaced like this was a business meeting instead of Christmas dinner. "You have a reliable income, Mara," she said smoothly, "and we're building our future. It makes sense for you to support us." My chest tightened. Evan finally met my eyes. "We're asking for half," he said. "Half of your salary each month just until we get on our feet." The room went still. No one laughed. No one objected. My sister Lena suddenly found the tablecloth fascinating. My brother Grant stared at his plate. Even the soft holiday music in the background felt too loud. Half my salary, the money I'd earned through decades of early mornings, late nights, and choosing responsibility over rest. The money that paid my bills, protected my independence, and kept my life stable. Claire smiled, gentle but firm. "You don't really need all of it," she added, "and family should support family." Every pair of eyes turned toward me, waiting, expecting compliance, expecting the woman who always said yes. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't defend myself. I simply nodded and said, "Let me think about it." What they didn't realize, what made that moment different from every other holiday, was that I already knew my answer. And once I spoke it, everything they took for granted was about to disappear. I didn't become my family's safety net overnight. It happened slowly, the way most burdens do, one small favor at a time. When Evan was young, I told myself sacrifice was part of motherhood. I worked longer hours so he wouldn't feel money worries. I took overtime instead of vacations. I learned to stretch a paycheck, to smile through exhaustion, to promise a child that everything would be fine even when I wasn't sure. And somehow, it always was, because I made sure of it. By the time he left for college, helping him felt automatic, like breathing, not a choice anymore. By the time Evan left for college, helping him financially wasn't even a question. Tuition gaps, rent deposits, emergency textbooks, I covered them without complaint. When he called late at night, stressed and overwhelmed, I never asked whether the expense was reasonable. I asked how quickly I could send the money. Love, in my mind, meant speed. It meant solving. After graduation came the wedding. Claire wanted something elegant, tasteful, unforgettable. I paid for what they called details, the florist upgrade, the photographer extension, the last-minute venue changes that somehow became urgent the moment they were mentioned. Each time I hesitated, I reminded myself it was only money, and this was family. Evan hugged me afterward and promised, "We'll make it up to you, Mom." I believed him because I wanted to, but repayment didn't come. Expectations did. If their car needed repairs, I was the call. If rent went up, I was the solution. If Claire decided staying home longer made more sense, my salary quietly absorbed the difference. No one announced it. No one thanked me. It was simply assumed that Mara would handle it the way she always had. Claire framed it as practicality. "You're good with money," she'd say. "You're stable." Evan framed it as trust. We wouldn't ask anyone else. And I framed it as love, because love sounded better than what it really was. Pressure wrapped in family language. What no one noticed, maybe what no one cared to notice, was the cost. Not just financially, but emotionally. I postponed my own plans. I delayed retirement contributions. I stopped talking about what I wanted because it felt selfish compared to what they needed. Somewhere along the way, I stopped being Evan's mother and became his backup plan, his insurance policy, his safety net. The most uncomfortable truth was that I helped build that role myself. I kept saying yes. I never asked who would catch me if I finally said no. After Christmas dinner, the request didn't fade the way I hoped it would. It grew teeth. Evan called a few days later, voice careful, like he was trying to keep the conversation pleasant. He asked whether I'd had time to think it through. When I didn't give him an answer immediately, he sighed and reminded me how expensive life had become, how hard they were trying, how temporary this sacrifice would be. Claire was less patient. She started sending articles, cost of living pieces, opinion columns about parents supporting adult children, posts insisting that family help was the foundation of success. Just sharing, she'd write, followed by a smiley face that felt more like a warning than kindness. Then the conversation stopped being private. At a Sunday lunch with relatives, Claire brought it up casually, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Mara's thinking about helping us out monthly," she said, like it was already settled. Heads turned. Nods followed. Someone murmured, "That's what parents do." Evan watched me closely, waiting to see if I'd correct her. I didn't. Not yet. But I felt it then. The shift. This wasn't a request anymore. It was an expectation, enforced by guilt, silence, and the unspoken rule that my comfort came last. And for the first time, instead of shrinking under that pressure, something in me quietly resisted. What none of them asked, what never once came up in all their talk about fairness and family, was how my life had changed. They still saw me as the same dependable woman who would stretch herself thinner to keep everything together. They assumed my income was fixed, predictable, available. What they didn't know was that over the last few years, I'd learned to keep my progress private. After years of living in reaction mode, I started planning. I accepted a promotion I didn't announce because it came with responsibilities I didn't want debated. I took on evening consulting work, not because I had to, but because I finally could. I met with a financial advisor for the first time in my life and learned the difference between generosity and obligation. I restructured my accounts, increased my retirement contributions, paid down debts that had followed me since Evan's early adulthood. Slowly, deliberately, I built stability that didn't rely on constant sacrifice. And I kept it to myself, not out of secrecy, but out of self-preservation. Because every time I shared good news in the past, it turned into someone else's opportunity. A raise became a request. A bonus became an emergency fund that wasn't mine. Visibility came with expectations, and I was tired of being punished for doing well. What hurt wasn't that Evan and Claire needed help. It was that they never asked how much I could give without hurting myself. They never asked what I wanted next. They never asked whether I was tired. They talked about my salary like it belonged to the family, like it was communal property, endless, automatic, and detached from the years it took to earn. They didn't see the discipline, the late nights, the choices I made alone when no one was watching. And realizing that changed something in me. I stopped feeling guilty for wanting more than survival. I stopped rehearsing defenses in my head before anyone accused me of being selfish. I understood, quietly, clearly, that my value in this family had become transactional, and I was allowed to change the terms. They thought my silence meant compliance. In reality, it meant clarity. And once I had that clarity, I knew the next conversation would be different from all the ones before. The next time we sat together, it wasn't a holiday. There were no candles, no music, no distractions to soften the edges. Evan and Claire came over one evening to talk, which I understood meant they expected a decision. Claire spoke first, as if continuing a discussion already settled. "We've gone over our budget," she said, sliding a neatly printed spreadsheet across my table. "This only works if you're on board." I didn't touch the paper. Evan leaned back, arms crossed, trying to look calm. "Mom, we really need to know where you stand." I looked at both of them, really looked, and noticed what I'd ignored for years. Neither of them looked worried. They looked confident, assured, like people who believed the outcome was guaranteed. I took a breath. "I've thought about your request," I said evenly. Then I delivered the sentence I'd been holding since Christmas dinner. "My answer is no." The word landed heavier than I expected. Claire blinked. Evan frowned. "No," he repeated, like he hadn't heard me correctly. "No," I said again. "I won't be giving you half my salary. Not now, not temporarily, not ever." Claire let out a short, disbelieving laugh. "Mara, don't be dramatic. We're not asking for everything." "You are," I replied calmly. "You're asking for my security, my future, my ability to live without fear." Evan's voice rose, sharp with disbelief. "So you're choosing money over your own son?" I shook my head. "I'm choosing responsibility over entitlement." The silence that followed was thick, but I didn't rush to fill it the way I used to. I didn't scramble to soften my words, didn't reach for a compromise to keep everyone comfortable. Instead, I continued. For years, I helped because I wanted to, because I believed it was support, not expectation. Somewhere along the way, that line disappeared. Claire's expression hardened. "So you're cutting us off?" "I'm setting boundaries," I said. "There's a difference." I told them what I'd never said out loud before. My income wasn't communal property. My plans mattered. My life wasn't an endless extension cord they could plug into whenever theirs went dark. No monthly transfers. No emergency rescues without discussion. No financial decisions made with the assumption that I'd absorb the fallout. They stared at me like I was a stranger. Evan stood up and paced, hands dragging through his hair. "You've changed," he said. "You used to care." "I still care," I replied. "I just care about myself, too, now." Claire crossed her arms. "This is selfish." "No," I said quietly. "This is sustainable." They left soon after, not with warmth or understanding, but with tight faces and clipped goodbyes. When the door closed, the house felt unusually quiet. Not empty, not tense. Clear. My answer hadn't just denied their request. It had reset the balance of our relationship. And for the first time in years, that felt like freedom. The fallout didn't come all at once. It arrived in waves. Texts, calls, accusations, each one sharper than the last. Evan called the next morning, voice tight. "You didn't have to say it like that," he said, as if tone was the real problem. "Claire didn't sleep. You scared her." I listened without interrupting. By noon, Claire sent a long message about stress and betrayal. She wrote about how she'd always thought of me as different from other mothers. The implication was clear. I'd failed a role I'd never agreed to play. Then the blame shifted. Evan accused me of blindsiding them, even though the demand had been theirs. Claire suggested I'd led them on by not refusing sooner. Relatives chimed in gently, warning that pride destroys families, that compromise is love. Not one of them asked what half my salary would have cost me. Not one asked why I'd finally said no. As panic replaced confidence, the story changed. The demand softened into a misunderstanding. The spreadsheet became just an idea. Claire even hinted they'd meant less than half, though the number had been perfectly clear. I didn't argue. I didn't correct them. For once, I let their discomfort exist without trying to fix it. A few days later, Evan showed up unannounced, tone cautious, almost pleading. "Maybe we rushed," he said. "We can talk about a smaller amount." I met his eyes. My answer hasn't changed. He left angry again, accusing me of being cold, of choosing independence over family. The words still stung, but less than they used to, because beneath the guilt and noise was something steady. Relief. They were scrambling because the safety net was gone, and for once, I wasn't the one falling. Over time, calls became fewer. Conversations became polite. They had to plan without me beneath them. And what surprised me most was what I gained. Better sleep, lighter days, a future I could imagine without calculating other people's expectations. Looking back, that Christmas wasn't about money. It was about permission. The permission they'd assumed they had to take until I had nothing left. That night, I didn't lose my family. I found my voice. And once you find it, you don't hand it away again.